UN Chief Antonio Guterres is warning of a global food crisis if the war in Ukraine continues. In South Africa, we're already seeing the cost of wheat, maize and cooking oil rise dramatically, not to even mention rising crude oil prices that impact food costs. Ukrainian farms have been turned into battlegrounds littered with landmines and military debris. But courageous farmers continue working the fields wearing flak jackets and helmets. Let's discuss this with Ukrainian Ambassador to South Africa, Liubov Abravitova. Ambassador, thank you so much for making the time to come and speak to us about this important issue. Not only the war in Ukraine is obviously of world concern, but agriculture. Ukraine is one of the major producers of corn and oilseeds in the world. With the war in Ukraine almost going into its fourth month, what are the major effects you've seen of the war on the agriculture sector there?
Good evening, and thank you for having me here. Yes, obviously this is one of the very crucial issues that disturbing today the world, because we already see the effects and consequences of Russian invasion in Ukraine. Indeed, today is the 87th day, almost 90th day of Ukrainian resistance towards Russian invasion. And being a very strong agricultural country, this is the primary sector that is affected. We faced here several very huge challenges. First of all, those stocks of agricultural commodities that already were available for departure from Ukrainian ports, seaports, are blocked. And today the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, already said that it's around 20,000 million tons of different commodities, including the corn and the wheat. So we desperately need the effort of the world community to push on Russia to unblock this ports in order to be able for us to deliver these products to mainly MENA and so it's Middle East and Northern African region. Another challenge is that our grains that we had to plant were deliberately attacked by Russians, and we had to request a part of the humanitarian military support that we are pleading for the seeds to plant during this season. And let's remind our viewers that today is almost summer in Ukraine, so it was exactly the time where we had to do our planting. And I'm sure the world's seen the brave Ukrainian farmers in helmets and protective gear on the fields, sometimes full of mines, continuing to plant. With the support of our partners, we were able to get to plant 80% of planned planting. And another challenge, it's obviously that in the temporarily occupied territories, the seized territories, Russia is taking all the reserves that we had out of Ukraine. So basically it's looting of Ukrainian agricultural commodities and destroying of our economy. So this is definitely something that will affect global economy and especially food security.
Let's talk about the planting season. You said that farmers have managed to miraculously plant 80% of the planned area. Let's talk about inputs. In order to sustain those seeds and to be able to deliver good crop based on what's been planted already, is that access, are those supply chains open?
Well, we know that there are the areas that are under control of Russian Federation temporarily, and it's very difficult to evaluate the situation there on the ground. And obviously nothing but robberies and looting is happening there, so we can only count on those territories that are under control of Ukrainian side. Yes, I think that the situation can be very fluid, and it will be depending on many issues, including the weather conditions that we are going to see in the nearest future. But the external influence is something that we cannot predict today, and if our supply chains are blocked as they are through the seaports today, then the European routes are not completely helpful, not 100% helpful for the basic usually deliveries from Ukraine.
So Ukraine is the largest world exporter of sunflower oil, and planting season starts at the end of April and should wrap up by the end of May. So that's one of the major things that farmers are concentrating on at the moment. Have they been able to plant so far, and what is the production forecast for the season?
So as I told you, the goal, as we understand that we are not controlling all the territory of Ukraine, is to plant 80% of what we are doing today. To predict whether we will be able to collect this crop, it's difficult because the shellings of Russian missile attacks, they are indiscriminate. And what we see as a part of civilian objects, they are targeting deliberately the agricultural facilities. Those are both the storages, the machinery capabilities, and of course our fields. So,
apart from being a major exporter, obviously Ukraine also needs to take into consideration that it needs to provide food for its own citizens. And if that's under threat, that becomes very difficult. So what are the current Ukrainian crop and food stocks looking like if they're being targeted so heavily by Russian military?
So it's also quite difficult to say on every stage of this invasion, because at certain stage we were really lack of supplies and lack of production of our own food, and we were asking for this kind of humanitarian assistance from outside. The country is looking at from 30 to 50 shortage of GDP in this year. So basically this is affecting all the areas of economy of Ukraine. And if today we are managing to support our local producers who had moved from the territories that are not safe for them to the safest ones, and the government is really trying to provide maximum assistance and a favorable climate for their activities where they are based now. But it will not be enough to cover all the needs of Ukraine, because a lot of infrastructure is destroyed. We look at around 18,000 kilometers of roads only destroyed, not to say about medical and agricultural and educational facilities.
What kind of international aid could help Ukraine's agricultural sector to try and, we're not even looking at recovery yet, we're still looking at trying to survive this invasion?
Yeah, it's very different, because starting from the seeds that we needed now during the planting season and finishing the machinery that was destroyed, then I think that the biggest effort that the international community could do today is to ensure that we will be able to supply through the seaports these commodities that hopefully we will be able to get as a harvest, and those that are already available.
So we're talking there about the eastern region of Ukraine, which is currently the major focus of Russia's military forces. What kind of intervention there is needed to try and open those seaports to make sure that Ukraine can not only export the commodities it has stored up, but also provide for its own people?
Well, you see, in the beginning of invasion, the strategy was to take Kiev, and there were huge fights in Kiev, in Kherson, in Mykolaiv. So we were able to free several cities, including Sumy and Kiev. The Mykolaiv and Odessa are still resistant, but the ports themselves, they are blocked not through the seized territories in Donbass. They are blocked from the seaside by the warships that are standing and preventing the civilian or trade ships to leave the ports. So this is basically two different battlefields, and Donbass area is the major battlefield that Ukraine is trying to push Russians back from our territory, and the best assistance in Donbass would be only the military assistance, the latest NATO military weapons with which we will be able to push Russia back from our territory.
Ukrainian forces have been very resilient in withstanding Russian military efforts, but the longer any kind of conflict drags on, the worse the conditions get for military personnel and for civilians stuck in the Ukraine as well. How are your military forces faring at the moment in the areas where conflict is still raging?
So far, almost for 90 days of invasion, we completely destroyed 17 very crucial battalions for Russians, completely. And they are really having big losses, both in people and in military weapon and equipment. Ukrainians will fight further. They will not give up. It's very obvious. We only ask for the external assistance that we can not only resist, because the motivation of Russian army obviously is also going down, and the pressure from inside in Russia is also getting higher. All these factors plus sanctions, I believe this is something that really will help Ukrainians to further push back and push out of Ukraine Russian troops.
In the beginning of this conflict, no one predicted that it would last this long. Is there any end in sight to this war?
No one predicted, and it was not the forecast or estimation, first of all, of Russian regime. And the only outcome and win for Ukraine can be getting our territories back in the borders of the internationally recognized borders. So our territorial integrity and sovereignty is not only the loud words. This is all those values that are recognized and have to be respected by all the countries of the world, big they are, small they are, superpowers they are, or in developing countries. And it's crucial to understand and realize it, especially here in Africa.
Have any engagements between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russia's President Vladimir Putin been successful to even a small measure? Has there been any progress in the negotiations?
Well, there were no direct contacts between these two presidents, and the Ukrainian side has been declaring and calling for this talks since the beginning of invasion. Russian side, through different rupers or a spokesperson, declares that Russian president is not yet ready to talk to Volodymyr Zelensky, and I think only this northern neighbor knows when they will want to talk. And I believe that as much as we push them back, as much as the partners are pushing them with sanctions, only this can force Putin to finally sit and negotiate with the Ukrainian side.
And do you think negotiations could hold the potential to solve this conflict?
I believe in negotiations. I believe in diplomacy. I always say I would never work in diplomacy if I would not believe in it. But obviously, if it comes to that point, both sides will need to take those decisions that may be unpopular for both of them, but in order to stop the loss of lives, they definitely have to start them. And we already, as Ukrainian side, with many our partners, came out with a number of initiatives, what could be the diplomatic solution. And we will need international guarantees of as many partners as we can involve for our security, for our sovereignty and territorial integrity. And if that could be provided and could be accepted, then it could guarantee stability not only for the region and for Europe, but for all the world. And some of the issues, disputable issues, obviously cannot be resolved during one round of negotiations. Some of them will need years to debate. And for example, the status of the annexed Crimea, we definitely will not abandon the peninsula, never. But we already declared that we are able to sit and negotiate the status with Russia for the next years.
And caught in the middle, we take our hats off to your farmers who, in the middle of the conflict, are doing their best to try and ensure food security, not only for Ukraine, but for all the countries that they send commodities to. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. We really do appreciate it. That was Ukrainian Ambassador to South Africa, Liubov Abravitova, giving us some insights into the situation in the Ukraine and the pressures on their economic and especially their agricultural sector.